elder law firm with offices in Appleton, Oshkosh, and Green Bay. Today we're going to be talking about protecting your loved ones from others. Back in August, we talked more about protecting your loved ones from themselves and other topics. So that's what we'll be kind of focusing on in our discussion today. I always just like to start off with that if you are attending live, there is a question and answer feature available for you on Zoom. So if you see that question and answer or Q&A feature, if you have any questions as we go through our topic today, I would love to answer them for you. You can put that right in that Q&A box. I'll answer those as we go, so no need to hold your questions if you have any. We are also going to be emailing out some materials for you after today's presentation, a handout going through a lot of the concerns and how your estate plan could help with those particular concerns, a feedback form for today's webinar. If you have any comments there, that would be appreciated. And we also have the opportunity to sign up for a complimentary initial consultation. So one of the things that we do is we do offer 2-hour complimentary initial consultations where you can meet with an attorney from our office. There's some materials that we'll provide to you ahead of time. We want to get to know you and the people that you're trying to plan for. And then typically by the end of that 2 hours, that attorney is going to have maybe a good sense of a recommendation for you and quote any fees at that time. But that 2 hours is totally complimentary. So if you'd like to get signed up for that, that will be emailed out to you. Same with those other materials. But otherwise, we'll kind of jump in to today's topic. It's one of my favorites. A big part of estate planning is planning around the individuals in your lives. So whether that's, we've talked about planning for you and your spouse as far as making sure you have what you need. And then when you pass away, if there's any particular planning that you're wanting to do for your loved ones to help protect them from other concerns. And just to address what those concerns might be and how your estate plan could help with that, I think the most common protection from others that I discuss with clients is divorce. So whether that is you're just wanting to make sure if a child was to get divorced, that you have some protections there, or perhaps you've, been divorced and want to make sure that you're protecting, potential minors or just children from influences of others. What's important when it comes to your estate plan and divorce concerns is identifying that, inheritance is individual property. So in Wisconsin, if you receive an inheritance, that's your individual property. But most of the time when people receive an inheritance, they go and put it in a bank account that maybe they own with their spouse. They put it in a bank account that's joint with them. Or they go and spend it on a joint purchase with their spouse. So they want to, buy a new home and use use some of the inheritance to do that. They want to go and pay off a joint debt or perhaps a debt for their spouse, student loans, or, if you want to pay off that mortgage on a property you own together. All these things create a problem that's called commingling. So what that means is you had something that was easily identifiable as separate, and you had the right to have that as separate, but you put it into something that's marital. And when it got there, now courts aren't able to tell, well, what's marital, what's individual. So the entire thing can be subject to division in a divorce proceeding. So you can always work to maintain kind of that individuality of the property, and your estate plan is a great place to do that, specifically to identify that maybe it's maintained in a separate thing, like a trust for the benefit of that child. Because when you maintain it in something that is inherently individual, you don't have as many concerns about that commingling aspect. And if you have really strong concerns about, well, what if I left my child something? And I'm really worried that they're just going to take it and spend it all on their spouse, or on something that, just give it all to their spouse because maybe you're concerned about the kind of impact or stuff that spouse has on that person. Well, you can always control potentially how the person you leave an inheritance to, who they can leave it to. So you can set certain limitations about, okay, whatever I leave to you, as your inheritance, if you go and leave it to someone else when you die, that has to be a descendant of mine, or that has to be a descendant of mine or charity. Your plan is able to identify those things. And in that situation of, if your child is divorced, or if you have concerns about that grandchild's, other parent, and you want to make sure that the financials are kind of separated or insulated from some of those concerns, you can identify who can't be in charge of money for that person, create some age protections, other things like that. So there's a lot of concerns around divorce. There's certainly different options available to you. And it's just really important that you're identifying that with your attorney and what options you have, and what might be best for your family based on your, particular concerns. So divorce is a really common thing that I talk through. Another thing, since we are in a, pretty litigious society, can be things like lawsuits, creditor concerns. If my child was to get into an accident, or perhaps if they're even someone who's more likely to be sued based on their profession. So that could be things like an attorney. That could be things like a doctor or a police officer or a business owner. If your child is in a spot where it's more likely that they would be sued, you can create protections that say that the inheritance that you leave them is not subject to those lawsuits. So, your child is worried about kind of other lawsuits separately, but at least what you leave them, they can always know it's not going to be part of that lawsuit, or it's not going to be part of what that person can go after if they're in something like a car accident or a high liability career. With general creditors, so similar to lawsuits, but if someone is looking at collections, money judgment issues, restitution that they owe, your estate plan can actually say that, the money that they leave them can't be used for those things, can't be accessed for creditors, and my child can't leave it to their creditors. Important things like that. So if your child has any credit issues, that you want to make sure that you're not just subjecting any money that you leave them directly to those things. That's very important planning that you can do in a will or a trust, just like all the other things that I've kind of mentioned. As far as predators, so just the idea of perhaps a young person or a person who is more susceptible to influence, having others know that they've received an inheritance, becomes a little bit more of a thought of privacy. Creating your estate plan so that way the information side of it is more limited to other people. So that way ill-intentioned people aren't necessarily going to be as aware of the fact of how much money someone has received, or if they have received any money. Like I don't know if you would remember, people would post like, wooden storks in their yards when their child or grandchild was born. It would say, baby boy John was born this date and he weighed this much, and it would say everything pretty much just shy of that person's social security number. We're a little bit more careful with information now, especially with how prevalent technology is. Information in your estate plan can be just as important for that reason too. And if your estate plan particularly is a will, or you're utilizing the probate process at all, just be aware of the fact that probate itself is a public thing. So you can go online and seek out someone's criminal record. Someone's probate estate is also public knowledge to that same extent too. So if you're trying to protect from predators and situations with that, as far as ongoing influence, sometimes the best things that I share with families is if you have a financial advisor that you work with that knows you, has helped you plan for your finances, let your kids know who that person is. So that way it can be a resource for them teach them good financial management, and then maybe you have someone who really knows your family, more aware of those things too, can help determine if there's anything that your child needs to be aware of, or maybe is being harmed from. That financial advisor, if you already have a resource like that, getting your kids connected with that, or at least they know where to go if that's something that they could utilize, for their lives. Bankruptcy is also a concern when we're talking about restitution ideas, or certainly like medical expenses. And I will just really kind of briefly pause just to mention that if you have any questions on what I've said so far, I'm more than happy to answer them. I know sometimes I can just start to talk for a lot at these too, so I'd love your questions if you have any. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going now into bankruptcy proceedings. So there is case law that if someone is in the middle of a bankruptcy and they receive their inheritance, like from their parent passes away during that bankruptcy proceeding, leaves them money, a court is not going to say, oh, well, you didn't have that at the point that you filed for bankruptcy, so we're not going to count it. Court is going to say, turn that over, we're spending it on this bankruptcy. So they could potentially lose that inheritance if they were in a filing system like that at the time, or impact, something, other things with that too. Your estate plan can specifically say that it can't be used on, it's not available for bankruptcy proceedings. Whether or not that happens is kind of another thing. And most of the time when I'm talking through these unforeseen circumstances, bankruptcy and lawsuits are in that same vein, because especially with bankruptcy, the most common reason that people file bankruptcy is medical expenses. It can have nothing to do with how responsible your child is. If they have a chronic condition that requires a high level of care or medication, or they have a diagnosis that then has them hospitalized for a while, all of those things could lead them to looking at filing medical bankruptcy. And protecting their inheritance from things like that, even if you don't know necessarily that could be a problem, is an important part of having different planning tools available to you. Having that conversation, especially if it is a concern. If a child does have a chronic illness, that's something you want to consider there too. So bankruptcy is important. I touched a little bit on care needs there as well. Just identifying if someone is likely to have care needs, and then inheritance could impact things like their monthly premiums or their deductibles or their qualification for long-term care services like Medicaid. And this could be for your child or their spouse. That qualification is important for a married couple as well. So you can protect the inheritance itself from medical debt and medical bankruptcy if you have those concerns, or again, you're just trying to make sure that if it becomes a concern, your family has an option there too. All of these things can be triggering, meaning you can say, well, if this is the case, then this happens. So it's not necessarily always your point A that's important. It is, but sometimes it's these other things that could happen as well, especially if you already know about these concerns. We do also help with high net worth planning. So when this can be important for protecting your loved ones from others, can be in a form of taxes. So if you are doing tax planning for yourself, if you're a high net worth person, or if you have high net worth children, you may want to be sure that how you're setting up your estate plan is not going to be not causing it to be taxed multiple times or in a tax inefficient way. You can even look to divide your estate among multiple generations, so that way you're potentially utilizing those younger people in lower tax brackets, with less income, and getting some tax inclusion or some tax benefits there. We also look to try to make sure that you're preserving that double step up in basis for capital gains taxes. So if you're looking at protecting from taxes, we certainly help with that too, and your estate plan can help with that. I don't see any questions yet, and I just have kind of one more thing that I specifically like to cover that is also a lot of questions for people, just student loans. So student loan debt, if that's something where you're worried about a child, or maybe your grandchild is looking to get some student loans, what you want to do is have your estate plan support that person's education without subjecting it to that student loan debt. So, student loans are not actually dischargeable in a bankruptcy proceeding. So it's really important if your loved one has a lot of student debt, or they're trying to retain student debt, that you want to make sure that whatever you leave them helps them kind of start their life. It's not simply having the inheritance go out so that way it's immediately liquidated and pays all those debts and other things too. You want to safely incorporate gifts or inheritance in your planning as well, so that way you're that financial qualification piece of student loans is not disrupted there too. So like I said, there's going to be a handout that's emailed out to you that walks through a lot of these same concerns, how your planning is able to accomplish those, what that looks like, why it's important to plan for. Otherwise, next week, we're back with our webinar talking all about guardianship and alternatives to guardianship. So if you're not familiar with that process, it's a great thing to attend. Then that next week, we're actually doing our wills versus trust public seminar. We're going to be at down in Oshkosh at the Culver Family Welcome Center. You can RSVP or register for that event. If you go on to estateplanninglive.com, you can see a full list of our events, get registered for anything there too. Materials will be emailed out to you. If you could take a minute for that feedback form, that would be great. Also initial consults, you can sign up for that there. And otherwise, I'm not seeing any questions. So I think we're all good for today. My PSA for everyone is that I think at like 1:18, which is just about an hour from now, your phones are all going off with that national alert. So just kind of, if you're not aware of that, you can find it on the news. It'll be about an hour from now. Otherwise, thank you so much for attending, and I hope to see you at another event soon.